The evening air was cold enough to make people walk faster than usual. Cars moved in long shining lines, their headlights reflecting against the glass windows of shops and restaurants. The city felt alive, loud, and busy. Laughter spilled from open doors. Music floated from different corners. The smell of grilled food and fresh bread mixed with the winter air. Most people were focused on their own plans, their own conversations, their own hunger after a long day. Near the entrance of one of the most elegant restaurants on the street stood a thin teenage girl. She looked small compared to the bright building behind her. The restaurant had tall glass windows, golden lights hanging from the ceiling, and tables covered in clean white cloth. Inside, people sat comfortably, leaning back in soft chairs, smiling as waiters placed warm plates in front of them. She stood still for a moment, watching through the glass. Her sweater was old and slightly torn near the sleeve. Her shoes had lost their shape long ago. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, as if she had done it quickly without a mirror. She wrapped her arms around herself, not only because of the cold but because of the tight, empty feeling in her stomach. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. The smell coming from inside the restaurant made everything worse. Fresh soup, warm bread, roasted meat. Even the soft scent of tea felt like a reminder of what she did not have. She swallowed slowly and looked down at her hands. They were small but strong. Her fingers were long and steady, even though her body looked weak. People passed by her without noticing. Some avoided eye contact. A few glanced at her and then quickly looked away. She was used to that. The city had taught her something very clearly. If you look like you don't belong, people pretend you don't exist. She wasn't always standing outside places like this. There was a time when evenings meant something different. A small room, a gentle voice, the soft sound of music drifting through a hallway. She pushed the memory away for a second and focused again on the present. Through the glass window, something caught her attention. In the corner of the restaurant, near a tall plant and a small stage-like area, stood a grand piano. It was black and polished so well that the lights above reflected on its surface. The lid was slightly open. It looked untouched at the moment, waiting quietly. No one was sitting at it. Her heart began to beat faster. She took one step closer to the glass. Her eyes stayed fixed on the piano. The world around her faded for a moment. The cold, the hunger, the noise of the traffic. None of it mattered in that second. All she could see were the keys. Her fingers moved slightly in the air, as if remembering something. A habit she never fully lost. Even when she walked through markets or sat near bus stops, her hands sometimes moved like that, pressing invisible keys. She closed her eyes briefly and imagined the feel of real ivory under her fingertips. Smooth, cool, familiar. The sound of a car horn pulled her back. She opened her eyes again. The piano was still there, still empty. A waiter walked past it, carrying a tray. A couple near the window laughed loudly. No one paid attention to the instrument. It was simply decoration tonight. She looked down at her stomach and felt it twist again. The choice in front of her felt impossible and simple at the same time. She could walk away like she had done many nights before. Find a quiet corner somewhere. Try to sleep while ignoring the hunger. Or she could take a risk. Her feet felt heavy as she moved toward the entrance. The glass door opened as someone stepped out, and warm air brushed against her face. It felt like stepping near a fireplace after standing in the snow. For a second, she froze at the doorway. Inside, the restaurant was even brighter than it looked from outside. Soft golden lights filled the space. Plates clinked gently. People spoke in calm, happy voices. Everything looked perfect. And then there was her. She stepped in carefully. The change was immediate. A few heads turned. Conversations lowered. A woman near the door looked surprised. A man frowned slightly. The girl felt their eyes move from her worn shoes to her sweater to her thin face. She kept walking, trying not to show fear. Before she could go too far, a staff member approached her. His expression was not angry, but it was cautious. He was used to protecting the peaceful environment of the place. "Can I help you?" he asked politely but firmly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Her throat felt dry. She swallowed and tried again. I don't want money, she said softly. I just want to ask something. The staff member waited. She glanced toward the piano in the corner. Felt far away now, like a dream she had imagined. Please, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. If I can play the piano for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, could I have something to eat? The words hung in the air between them. For a second, the staff member looked confused, then surprised. He followed her gaze to the piano and then looked back at her hands. Some guests nearby had started listening. A few whispered quietly. You play? He asked. She nodded. Yes. There was no pride in her voice. No show. Just a simple answer. The staff member hesitated. He looked around the restaurant, unsure. It was not a usual request. The place was known for calm evenings, soft background music, and professional performers on special nights, not for unexpected guests asking for a chance. Please, she repeated. I won't cause trouble. Just 5 minutes. Her stomach growled quietly, and she hoped no one heard it. The staff member studied her face. There was something in her eyes that didn't look like she was joking. It wasn't boldness. It wasn't confidence either. It was something else. Something deeper. A quiet certainty. He wasn't the manager, but he signaled for him anyway. While waiting, the girl stood still. She could feel the weight of the room on her shoulders. Some people clearly doubted her. Others looked curious. A few seemed uncomfortable. The manager approached, listening as the staff member explained the situation. The manager's eyes moved slowly from her face to her hands. He looked toward the piano, then back at her. You're saying you can play? He asked. Yes, she answered. For 5 minutes? Yes. And that's all you want? A meal? She nodded. He sighed quietly. It was a busy evening. Taking a risk could disturb the mood. But something about the request felt unusual. It wasn't begging for coins. It wasn't creating a scene. It was an offer. Finally, he spoke. 5 minutes, he said. If it becomes disruptive, we stop. Relief washed over her so quickly she almost lost balance. She nodded again, whispering, Thank you. The path to the piano felt longer than it had looked from outside. Each step echoed in her ears. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest, in her throat, even in her fingertips. She reached the bench. For a moment she didn't sit. She stood beside the instrument, looking at it closely. The polished surface reflected her face faintly. She could see how thin she had become, how tired. She gently touched the edge of the piano, almost like greeting an old friend after a long separation. Then she sat down. The room had grown quieter. Not completely silent, but quieter. People were watching now, some with interest, some with doubt. She placed her hands above the keys. Her fingers hovered there, slightly shaking. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she cared too much. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she was no longer in a restaurant. She was somewhere else. Somewhere softer. Somewhere warm. A small hallway. A distant room with music drifting out. A voice telling her to try again. Slower this time. Her breathing slowed. The hunger, the stares, the fear. They faded into the background. Only the keys mattered now. She lowered her fingers and pressed the first note. The first note was soft, almost shy. It floated into the air like a question. A few people who had been whispering went quiet without even realizing it. The sound did not feel random or careless. It was gentle and steady, like someone knocking politely on a door. She pressed another key, then another. The melody began to form slowly, like a story unfolding step by step. Her fingers were no longer shaking. They moved with quiet confidence, as if they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. At first, a few guests returned to their conversations, thinking it would just be simple background music. But within seconds, something changed. The notes became deeper, fuller. The sound carried emotion that was impossible to ignore. The girl's back straightened. Her shoulders relaxed. Her face, which had looked tired and worried moments ago, now looked calm, focused. She was no longer thinking about who was watching her. She was not thinking about food anymore either. She was somewhere else. Her hands moved across the keys with surprising control. Not too fast, not too slow. Every note felt placed with care. The melody grew stronger, rising and falling like a quiet wave. It wasn't loud, but it filled the room completely. A man near the center table slowly put down his fork. A woman who had been checking her phone lowered it to her lap. Even the waiters paused for a second longer than usual before continuing their work. The music did not sound like something learned yesterday. Carried practice, memory, feeling. The manager, who had been standing with his arms crossed near the entrance, uncrossed them without noticing. His expression changed from caution to curiosity. The girl shifted into a different part of the piece. The notes became brighter, almost hopeful. There was a warmth in the melody that made people feel something they could not easily explain. Felt honest. One of the older guests closed his eyes. He didn't know the girl. He didn't know her story. But the music made him remember something from years ago. A small house, a simple piano, laughter in the background. He blinked quickly and looked down at the table. The 5 minutes that had been promised were slowly passing, but no one was counting anymore. Her fingers moved faster now, but never out of control. Each movement was clear, smooth. The melody rose higher, then softened again, like it was breathing. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove something. She was simply letting the music speak. Inside her mind, memories began to surface. A narrow hallway with old wooden floors. The faint smell of cleaning liquid mixed with dust. A door slightly open at the end of the hall. From inside that room, music. She remembered sitting quietly near that doorway years ago, listening carefully, watching how hands moved over keys, waiting for the room to be empty so she could step inside and try it herself. She remembered being told to be careful, to not touch anything she could not fix. But when no one was around, she would sit at the piano and press a key softly, just to feel the vibration travel through her fingers. Back in the restaurant, her hands continued moving with the same careful love. The melody shifted again, becoming slower, deeper. There was a sadness now, but it was not heavy. It was gentle, like rain falling at night. The room felt smaller somehow, more connected. A young couple near the window stopped eating completely. The woman's eyes had filled with tears before she even noticed. She quickly wiped them, slightly embarrassed, but she couldn't look away from the girl at the piano. The sound reached the kitchen as well. One of the cooks stepped closer to the door just to listen. The usual noise of plates and pans seemed softer, as if even they respected the moment. The girl pressed a low note that echoed through the floor. Then a soft series of higher ones answered it. Felt like a conversation, like someone speaking and someone else responding. Her face showed small changes as she played. A slight tightening around the eyes during the sad parts. A faint lift of her lips when the melody turned hopeful. She was not performing for the room. She was reliving something. The manager glanced at his watch out of habit. More than 5 minutes had passed. He did not move. No one asked him to stop her. Instead, a strange stillness had taken over the restaurant. Not uncomfortable, not tense, just focused. She transitioned into the final part of the piece. It began softly again, almost like the beginning, but now it felt stronger. Survived. The notes were clear and steady, like someone who had fallen but learned to stand again. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, then slowed. The melody softened more and more, each note spaced carefully apart. Felt like the end of a long conversation, like saying goodbye without using words. She pressed the final key. The sound lingered for a second in the air. Then silence. Real silence. No clinking plates. No whispers. No movement. She kept her hands resting on the keys for a moment longer, her eyes still closed. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she took a breath. When she opened her eyes, she seemed almost surprised to see where she was. The restaurant, the people, the lights. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, A single clap sounded. Another followed. And then the entire restaurant erupted into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't small or forced. It was loud, honest, full. Some people even stood up. The girl blinked quickly, overwhelmed. She had not expected this. She had only hoped for a meal. Her hands slipped off the keys and rested in her lap. She looked down, unsure how to react. Her cheeks grew warm. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. The manager walked slowly toward her. His steps were careful, almost respectful now. That was... He paused, searching for the right word. That was beautiful. She looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. Thank you, she said quietly. A waiter nearby leaned closer. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked gently. She hesitated. It was not a simple answer. Not something she usually explained. I used to listen, she said softly, and practice when no one was around. The guests closest to her were still watching, still moved. The woman by the window stood up and walked a few steps closer. You made me remember my mother, she said, her voice slightly shaking. She used to play just like that. The girl didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded politely. Her stomach reminded her of why she had come. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the room stayed warm. The manager cleared his throat gently. You asked for a meal, he said. You will have more than that tonight. Her eyes widened slightly. Thank you, she whispered again. He signaled to the staff. Prepare a proper dinner. As she stood up from the piano bench, her legs felt weak. Not from fear this time, but from emotion. She had poured something personal into those keys. Something she usually kept hidden. A small path opened through the tables as she followed the waiter toward a quiet corner seat. People smiled at her as she passed. Some nodded with respect. No one looked at her clothes anymore. They looked at her hands. She sat down carefully, still trying to understand what had just happened. A glass of water was placed in front of her. She held it with both hands, feeling the cool surface. Across the room, the piano remained where it had always been. But it no longer looked like decoration. It looked like a doorway. And for the first time in a long while, the girl felt something stronger than hunger. She felt seen. The plate placed in front of her did not look real at first. Steam rose slowly from the food. Warm bread sat on the side. There was soup, rice, vegetables, and something she had only smelled from outside before. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Her hands rested in her lap as if she was afraid that touching it would make it disappear. Go on, the waiter said gently. It's for you. She nodded and whispered a soft thank you. Her first bite was small, careful. The warmth spread through her mouth and down her throat. It felt almost overwhelming. She had eaten scraps before, leftover pieces handed to her quickly. But this was different. This was a full plate, prepared for her. Around the restaurant, conversations slowly returned, but they were different now, softer. Many people kept glancing toward her table, not with judgment, not with suspicion, with curiosity. She tried to eat slowly, but hunger kept pulling her to take another bite, then another. She reminded herself to breathe between each one. She didn't want to look desperate. While she ate, the manager stood near the counter, speaking quietly with a couple who had approached him. They were still talking about the music. The woman wiped her eyes again, still emotional. After a few minutes, the manager walked over to the girl's table. He did not stand above her this time. He pulled a chair and sat across from her. You play very well, he said. She lowered her spoon for a moment. Thank you. Have you ever performed somewhere before? He asked. She shook her head. No. Never on a stage? Not even in school. She hesitated. I didn't go to school for long. He studied her face carefully. Not in a harsh way, but like someone trying to understand something important. How did you learn? He asked again, this time more gently. She looked down at her hands. They were clean now, but small marks and roughness showed years of hard days. Her fingers traced lightly along the edge of the table. My mother worked in a music building, she began quietly. She cleaned the rooms. Sometimes, after everyone left, She let me sit at one of the pianos. The manager listened without interrupting. I wasn't allowed to take lessons, she continued, but I listened. I watched when doors were open. I tried to remember what I heard. When no one was around, I practiced. Her voice did not carry sadness when she spoke about it. Carried memory. She used to sit beside me and smile, the girl added. Even when I made mistakes. The manager felt a tightness in his chest. And now? He asked softly. She paused. She passed away 2 years ago, she said simply. After that, we lost the room we were staying in. I haven't touched a real piano since. The words were calm, but they carried weight. From a nearby table, one of the guests who had been listening quietly stood up and approached them. He was older, dressed neatly, but his expression was kind. "Excuse me," he said to the manager. Then he looked at the girl. "What you played tonight, that was not something a person forgets." She felt her face grow warm again. "I just played what I remembered." "That's exactly why it was special," he replied. The manager nodded slowly. Would you like to play again? Maybe this weekend? We sometimes have live music on Saturdays." The question surprised her so much that she almost forgot to breathe. "Here?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Properly. Announced. Not just 5 minutes." She stared at him, unsure if this was real. "I don't have nice clothes," she said quietly. "And I don't know many pieces." "That can be arranged," the older guest said gently. "Clothes are not the music. And what you played tonight was enough to move a room." She looked between them, unsure what to say. Across the restaurant, more people were still watching. Not in a loud way, in a hopeful way. The manager leaned back slightly. "You asked for food," he said. "But I think you gave us something more valuable." Her throat tightened at those words. She had come inside feeling invisible. Now she felt like the center of something she didn't fully understand. "Would you like some dessert?" the waiter asked from beside her table, smiling. She blinked, surprised again. "I've had enough," she said softly. "Nonsense," the waiter replied kindly. "Tonight is special." A small plate of warm dessert was placed in front of her. She looked at it, then at the piano across the room. It no longer felt far away. As she finished eating, the older guest pulled out a small card from his pocket and placed it gently on the table. "I know someone who teaches music," he said. "Not a big academy, just a small place. Good people. If you're willing, I can arrange for you to meet them." Her eyes widened. "Lessons?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he answered. "Real lessons." She had imagined that word many times in her life. Lessons. A teacher correcting her hand position. Sheet music placed in front of her. Practice that did not have to be secret. "But I can't pay," she said quickly. "Let's not talk about that tonight," he replied with a small smile. "Sometimes talent is payment enough." The manager nodded in agreement. "Come back tomorrow afternoon," he said. "We'll talk more. You won't have to stand outside again." The words hit her deeply. You won't have to stand outside again. She felt something shift inside her. Something fragile but strong at the same time. Hope. As the evening slowly continued, a few guests came to her table to thank her personally. Some shared small memories the music had brought back. Others simply shook her hand. No one asked about her clothes. No one mentioned where she had come from. They asked about the music. When it was finally time for her to leave, the manager handed her a small bag. "Some food for later," he said. "Just in case." She held it carefully, almost like it was something breakable. At the door, she turned back once more to look at the piano. The lights above it made the surface shine softly. It looked peaceful. For a second, she imagined herself sitting there again. Not as someone asking for permission, but as someone invited. She stepped outside into the cold air, but it didn't feel as sharp as before. The city lights were still bright. Cars still moved quickly. People still hurried past. But something inside her had changed. She walked a few steps down the street before stopping. She looked at her hands under the streetlight. The same hands that had once pressed keys quietly in an empty hallway. The same hands that had not touched a piano in 2 years. Tonight, those hands had filled a room with silence. She tightened her fingers into a small fist, then relaxed them again. Tomorrow afternoon. The words echoed in her mind. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about how to survive the next day. She was thinking about how to prepare. And somewhere behind the restaurant's glass window, the piano waited. That night felt different from all the other nights she had spent outside. She found her usual quiet corner near a closed shop, but instead of curling up immediately to sleep, she sat awake for a long time. The small bag of food the manager had given her rested beside her. She had already eaten more than she had in days, yet she kept opening the bag just to make sure it was still there. It felt like proof that the evening had truly happened. The street was quieter now. Most of the noise had faded. Only distant cars and the soft hum of city lights remained. She looked at her hands again under the dim street lamp. They no longer felt weak. They felt important. Tomorrow afternoon. She repeated those words in her mind again and again. She was afraid that if she slept too deeply, she might wake up and realize it had all been a dream. But morning came and it was real. The sun rose slowly between tall buildings, and the air was less cold than the night before. She washed her face at a public tap nearby and tried to smooth her hair as best as she could. She didn't have many clothes to choose from, so she cleaned the sweater she had worn and let it dry in the sun for a while. She kept thinking about the restaurant. Would they still welcome her? Would the manager change his mind? Would the older guest remember what he had promised? Fear tried to creep into her thoughts, but something stronger pushed it back. The memory of the applause, the silence before it, the feeling of being seen. By afternoon, she was standing across the street from the restaurant again. This time, she wasn't looking through the glass with hunger. She was looking with hope. The restaurant looked calmer during the day. Fewer people, chairs being arranged, staff preparing for the evening. The piano was still there, shining quietly in its place. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. One of the waiters recognized her immediately and smiled. "You came," he said warmly. She nodded. "You told me to. Wait here," he replied, gesturing toward a chair near the entrance. Her heart beat quickly while she waited. She could hear the sound of plates being stacked and soft conversations between staff members. The room didn't feel intimidating this time. It felt familiar. After a few minutes, the manager walked toward her. His expression softened when he saw her. "I'm glad you returned," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted honestly. "You should always return where you are welcomed," he replied. He invited her to sit at one of the tables. A glass of water was placed in front of her again, but this time it felt less like charity and more like kindness. The older guest from the previous night arrived shortly after. He carried a small folder in his hand. "I was hoping you would come," he said with a gentle smile. She stood up quickly, not sure whether to shake his hand or simply nod. She ended up doing both in an awkward but sincere way. They all sat down together. "I spoke with a friend this morning," the older guest began. "He runs a small music school. Not fancy, but honest. I told him about you." Her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "He wants to meet you," he continued. "Not for a test. Not for pressure. Just to listen." "To listen?" she repeated softly. "Yes, just like we did last night." She felt her throat tighten again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from disbelief. The manager leaned forward slightly. "And about the restaurant," he added. "If you are willing, we would like you to play here this weekend. Properly. We will announce it. People will come to hear you." The idea felt too big to understand all at once. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes, you," he replied. "The girl who made a room full of strangers forget their food." She let out a small, nervous laugh. "I don't know many songs," she admitted. "Only the ones I remember." "That's enough," the older guest said gently. "Music is not about how many songs you know. It's about how you play them." The manager stood up. "Come," he said. "Sit at the piano again." Her heartbeat quickened as she walked toward it. This time there were no judging eyes, only curious ones. Staff members paused in their tasks to watch her. She sat down slowly. The bench felt less foreign now. The keys felt like something she had been waiting to touch again. "Play anything," the manager encouraged. She closed her eyes, just like the night before. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She felt nervous, but it was a different kind of nervous. Not fear of rejection. Fear of possibility. She began to play. The melody was softer this time, more careful. She wanted to show them that the night before had not been luck. It had been real. The notes flowed gently across the room. Even in the quiet afternoon, the sound filled the space beautifully. When she finished, no one clapped loudly. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, there were smiles, nods, a quiet understanding. The manager looked at the older guest and then back at her. "It's settled," he said. She blinked. "What is?" "You play Saturday evening," he replied. "We will prepare a simple dress for you. Nothing too fancy. Just something you feel comfortable in." Her eyes widened. No one had offered her new clothes in a long time, especially not for something like this. "And tomorrow," the older guest added, "you will come with me to meet the music teacher." Everything was happening so quickly that her mind struggled to keep up. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. The question was honest. She needed to understand. The older guest thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing," he said quietly. "And because talent should not be left on the street." The words stayed with her. That evening, as she stepped back outside, she didn't walk to her usual corner. Instead, the manager had arranged a small storage room behind the restaurant for her to rest temporarily. It wasn't large, but it was clean and warm. When she entered the room for the first time, she stood still for a moment. There was a small bed, a blanket, a light. It wasn't luxury, but it was safety. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands again. Just days ago they had been invisible. Now they were her future. She lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling. Fear still existed somewhere inside her. What if she failed? What if the teacher said she wasn't good enough? What if Saturday didn't go well? But another voice inside her was stronger. "You already played once. You already survived worse." For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond the next meal. She imagined learning properly, reading music without guessing, practicing every day without hiding, maybe even performing somewhere bigger one day. The thought made her smile in the dark. Outside, the city continued moving as always. Cars passed. People hurried home. Lights flickered in tall buildings. But inside that small room behind the restaurant, a quiet new beginning was forming. And it had started with 5 simple minutes. The next morning felt almost unreal. She woke up slowly, not to the noise of traffic or the cold wind brushing against her face, but to soft light coming through a small window. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the clean wall, the folded blanket at her feet, and the small chair in the corner. She sat up quickly. It was still there. The room, the bed, the chance. She washed up in the small restroom nearby and tried to make herself look as neat as possible. Her reflection in the mirror looked different somehow. Not because her clothes had changed. They hadn't. But her eyes looked brighter, less tired. A knock came at the door. It was the older guest. He greeted her with a kind smile and handed her a small paper bag. "Breakfast," he said simply. She took it carefully. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied. They walked together down the street. The morning air felt fresh. She stayed quiet most of the way, holding the bag close to her chest. She was nervous. "What is he like?" she asked softly as they turned a corner. "The teacher," he replied. "Patient. Honest. He cares about music more than money." She nodded, hoping that would be enough. The music school was not large. It stood between a bookstore and a small cafe. The paint on the outside walls was slightly faded, but the windows were clean. Through the glass, she could see a few instruments inside. Her heart began to beat faster. They stepped in. The smell inside was different from the restaurant. It carried a mix of polished wood and old paper. There were framed pictures on the walls, students holding certificates, small group performances, smiling faces beside pianos. From a room down the hall, she could hear someone practicing scales. The sound was steady and disciplined. The older guest led her toward an office where a middle-aged man sat behind a desk covered with sheet music. He looked up as they entered. "So this is the young musician," he said gently. She felt her cheeks grow warm. "She is," the older guest replied, "and she needs someone to listen." The teacher stood up and walked toward her. He didn't look at her clothes. He didn't look at her shoes. He looked at her hands. "May I?" he asked softly, gesturing toward them. She held them out without speaking. He examined them briefly, not touching, just observing. "Long fingers," he murmured. "Good for control." She felt both nervous and hopeful at the same time. "Would you like to play?" he asked. Her throat felt dry again. "Yes." He led her into one of the practice rooms. A simple upright piano stood against the wall. It wasn't shiny like the one in the restaurant, but it looked loved. Used often. She stepped closer to it slowly. "Play whatever you like," the teacher said. "Don't try to impress me. Just play." She nodded. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. For a second, doubt crept in. What if the restaurant had been luck? What if she forgot everything now? She closed her eyes. She remembered her mother's quiet smile. The hallway. The stolen practice moments. The applause 2 nights ago. Her fingers began to move. The melody started softly, just like before. But this time she allowed herself to go deeper. She didn't hold back. The teacher didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He simply listened. As the music filled the small room, she forgot about being judged. She forgot about being tested. She just played. When she finished, silence followed again. She slowly opened her eyes. The teacher's expression was calm, but his eyes carried something strong. "Who taught you to shape phrases like that?" he asked quietly. "I listened," she replied, "and practiced when I could." He nodded slowly. "You have natural feeling. That cannot be forced." She felt relief spread through her chest. "But," he continued gently, "your technique needs guidance. Your hands sometimes tense in the faster sections. And you need structure, discipline." She listened carefully, not offended. She wanted to learn. "Would you be willing to practice daily?" he asked. "Yes," she answered immediately. "Even when it's hard?" "Yes." "Even when it feels frustrating?" She nodded again. "Yes." He smiled for the first time. "Then I will teach you." The words felt like a door opening inside her. "About payment," the older guest began, but the teacher raised his hand gently. "We will arrange something," he said. "For now, let her learn." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. "Don't cry," the teacher said kindly. "Music is long work. Save your tears for the keys." They all laughed softly. Before leaving, the teacher handed her a thin book of beginner exercises. "Start with these," he said. "No shortcuts. Strong basics create strong musicians." She held the book carefully, as if it were something fragile. On the walk back, she felt lighter than she had in years. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to the older guest. "You already did," he replied. "The night you played." When they returned to the restaurant, the manager was waiting. "Well?" he asked eagerly. She smiled for the first time without hesitation. He said yes. The manager clapped his hands together once. "Good. Very good." Preparations for Saturday began immediately. The staff spoke about arranging chairs differently. A small sign would be placed outside announcing live piano music. Word had already started spreading among regular customers about the girl who had appeared from nowhere. That evening, the manager handed her a simple dress. It was modest, soft in color, and clean. "For Saturday," he said. She ran her fingers over the fabric. Felt smooth. New. "I've never worn something like this," she admitted quietly. "You will get used to new things," he replied. As the days moved toward Saturday, She practiced every spare moment. In the mornings, she went to the music school for lessons. In the afternoons, she practiced again at the restaurant before opening hours. Her fingers sometimes hurt, her back sometimes ached, but she didn't complain. For the first time, her days had direction. On Friday night, as she sat alone in the small room behind the restaurant, she felt both excitement and fear. Saturday would not be like the first night. It would not be a surprise moment. People would come expecting something. What if she disappointed them? She looked at her reflection in the small mirror. "You begged to play for food," she whispered to herself. "Now you play because you can." The fear softened. She lay down slowly, holding the small exercise book close to her chest. Outside, the city continued its endless movement. Inside, a girl who once stood unnoticed outside a glass window was preparing to sit at the piano not as a stranger, but as the evening's music. And for the first time, she wasn't just hoping to survive the night. She was ready to step into it. Saturday evening arrived faster than she expected. All day, her stomach had been full of nervous energy. She tried to focus during her morning practice at the music school, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the restaurant, to the piano, to the chairs that would be filled with people who were coming just to hear her. When she returned to the small room behind the restaurant that afternoon, the dress was hanging neatly on a hook. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Just a few days ago, she had stood outside this same building, unsure if she would even be allowed to step inside. Now she was preparing to perform there. She washed her hands carefully, paying attention to every finger. Her teacher's voice echoed in her mind. "Relax your wrists. Don't rush the fast parts. Let the melody breathe." She changed into the dress slowly. The fabric felt strange against her skin, not because it was uncomfortable, but because it was new. She looked at herself in the small mirror. For a second, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her hair was brushed properly. The dress fit simply but nicely. Her eyes still carried traces of the life she had lived, but they also carried something else now. Confidence. A soft knock came at the door. "It's almost time," the manager said gently from outside. Her heart started pounding. "I'm coming," she replied. When she stepped into the main dining area, she stopped in surprise. The restaurant was fuller than usual. Every table was taken. A few extra chairs had been placed near the piano. People were speaking in excited whispers. Some had clearly heard about the girl who had appeared out of nowhere and played like she had something to prove. The piano stood under a slightly brighter light tonight. Not too bright, just enough to make it clear that it was the center of the evening. The manager walked her to it. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered before stepping away. "Just be you." She nodded. As she sat down on the bench, the room slowly quieted. Forks were placed down. Glasses stopped moving. Conversations faded into silence. She placed her hands on her lap and took one deep breath. Then another. She remembered the cold night outside the window, the empty feeling in her stomach, the fear of being turned away. She remembered her mother's smile in the hallway years ago, the quiet support, the stolen moments at a piano no one thought belonged to her. And she remembered the applause from the first night, the surprise in people's eyes. She lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The first note rang out, steady and clear. This time it was not shy. The melody began with something soft and simple, almost like a greeting. The sound traveled smoothly across the room, wrapping around each table. She didn't rush. She let each note settle before moving to the next. People leaned forward slightly in their seats. She moved into the next section, where the music grew brighter. Her fingers flowed with more confidence now. The practice from the past days showed. Her wrists were relaxed. The fast parts were controlled. The room felt connected again, just like the first night, but stronger. Halfway through the piece, she allowed herself to add something personal. A small change in rhythm, a gentle shift in tone. It wasn't written in any book. Came from memory, from feeling. A woman near the front table closed her eyes, her face softening. A young boy sitting beside his parents watched her hands closely, completely still. The older guest who had first offered help sat quietly near the back, a small proud smile on his face. She moved into a slower section. The melody deepened. There was emotion there, but it was no longer heavy with sadness. Carried strength now. Survival. Growth. Her fingers pressed a series of lower notes that echoed warmly through the floor. Then lighter notes answered them, like hope rising after a storm. She felt it clearly now. She was not playing for food. She was not playing for sympathy. She was playing because this was who she was. When she reached the final part of the piece, her heart felt steady instead of nervous. The notes flowed naturally, each one placed with care. She allowed the music to rise gently, then soften, like a story coming to a peaceful end. The final note lingered in the air. Silence followed. For a moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Then the applause began. Louder than the first night. Stronger. Some people stood up. Others wiped away tears. A few simply clapped with wide smiles, shaking their heads in disbelief. She stayed seated for a second, taking it in. This time, she did not look down shyly. She looked at the audience, and she smiled. The manager approached her, clapping as well. "That," he said quietly when the applause softened, "was worth more than any advertisement we could have bought." She laughed softly, still overwhelmed. Several guests approached her table afterward, just like before. But the conversations were different now. "You play with such heart," one person said. "How long have you been studying?" another asked. She answered honestly, "Only recently, properly." Her teacher arrived near the end of the evening. He had come quietly and listened from the back. "You remembered to relax your wrists," he said with a small nod. She smiled. "I tried." "You did more than try," he replied. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, the manager called her over. "We would like you to play here every Saturday," he said. "If you agree." Her eyes widened again, just like they had days ago. "Every Saturday?" "Yes. You bring something special to this place." She looked at the piano, then back at him. "I would love to," she said. The older guest added, "And your lessons will continue. We will make sure of that." She felt tears in her eyes again, but this time she didn't hide them. "Thank you," she whispered. When the restaurant finally emptied and the lights dimmed, she walked back to the small room behind the building. She changed out of the dress carefully and folded it neatly. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands once more. They were still the same hands, but her life was no longer the same. She thought about the first moment she had pressed a key in that hallway years ago. She had only wanted to feel the sound. She had not known it would one day lead her here. The journey ahead would not be easy. She knew that. Lessons would be hard. Practice would take time. There would be mistakes. There would be days of doubt. But now she had something she didn't have before. A place to belong. A teacher to guide her. People who believed in her. And a piano that was no longer behind glass. Outside, the city lights shimmered as they always had. Cars moved. Voices echoed faintly in the distance. But inside that small room, a girl who once begged for 5 minutes had found something far greater than a meal. She had found her beginning.